A line formed before the city was fully awake. Mothers held children close against the wind. Old men stood still to save strength. Everyone waited for food that the system never delivered. Across the same sidewalk, money arrived first. A black car, a coat that did not belong to this block. Police watched from a distance and did not move. Church doors stayed open, but the power was outside. Ellsworth, Bumpy. Johnson stepped into the cold like it was his territory. He looked at the people first, not the cameras. If the law could not stop him here, what else could he do in plain sight? Harlem, New York. Thanksgiving morning. A black Cadillac stopped in front of a church. A man stepped out in a camel hair coat. The coat cost more than most families on that block could save in half a year. He did not walk toward a private table. He walked toward a line. The line did not belong to gamblers. It belonged to mothers. Children wrapped tight in blankets. Old men standing on bad knees. Women with paper, thin gloves. They had been there before dawn. The air sat just above freezing. No one complained. They did not come for a sermon. They did not come for city aid. They came for food that would not arrive any other way. He lit a cigar slow. He watched the line stretch down the avenue. 6 blocks. He nodded once, and the street became an operation. A turkey moved from hand to hand. Cans stacked and vanished. Bags of produce passed like evidence. Pies went out in neat rows. Then envelopes appeared. Quiet, folded, heavy. Not announced, not advertised, just placed. One family at a time. He stood there and did it himself, hour after hour. He did not hide behind church men. He did not send an assistant. He did not stay in a warm car. He worked the line like a boss works a payroll. A handshake for the fathers. A brief word for the mothers. A kiss on a child's forehead. Nothing sentimental, nothing staged, just control. The kind that makes people move without being told. The kind that makes arguments die before they start. Across the street, the police watched. They did not step in. They did not break it up. They did not reach for cuffs. They stood like men assigned to observe a parade they hated. They knew what the money was. They knew what funded the food. They knew who was standing in the cold. They also knew what would happen if they touched him there. In front of that line. In front of those mothers. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. This was not anger. It was a public demonstration of immunity. It was done in daylight, with photographers close enough to see the smoke leave his mouth, with reporters close enough to hear the small talk, with bodyguards close enough to make the sidewalk feel narrower. The church was only the address. The power was outside. The city had welfare offices. The city had departments. The city had budgets. None of it was on that curb. What stood there was a private system, funded by illegal money, run with efficiency, delivered with dignity. People were not treated like they were begging. They were processed like they were owed. A woman reached the front of the line. An elderly widow, hands worn down. A check that did not stretch. She held his hand and did not let go. She spoke like a person reporting a fact. Not pleading, not praising. Then his voice came low. A single instruction, a single correction to the world. Don't thank me. He gave her extra cans. He slipped an envelope into her palm. He closed her fingers around it. He sent a man to carry her food home. No paperwork, no forms, no lecture. A steel worker came later laid off. 4 children, rent behind. The kind of situation that ends with a marshal at the door. The man reached the table and tried to stand straight. He did not know what face to make. He did not know what rules applied. The gangster looked at him like he was reading a file. Then he called for the bookkeeper. The ledger came out. Numbers were checked. A decision was made. $200, a name written down, an address, a promise of someone checking back. Not charity. Surveillance, aid with strings that were invisible. A young mother waited with an infant. Her husband locked up. No income worth writing down. She did not care what the city thought of this man. She only cared that the baby needed formula. He saw the child. He did not ask questions. He issued an order. An envelope, $100. Then a warning that sounded like protection. Come to me personally. That line moved all day, 14 hours. The cold never softened. The light shifted. The street darkened. The work continued. When turkeys ran out, more were bought. Full retail. No delay. A man arrived late with a cane. An old worker with a pension that did not cover rent. He expected nothing. He said he was late. He said it was all right. The gangster heard him. He walked over. He put a turkey in his hands. Then another envelope. $75. A coat was mentioned. Not as a suggestion, as a directive. The old man tried to refuse. The refusal did not matter, because refusal was not part of the system. A minister appeared near the edge. A man who preached against gambling. A man who warned his people about numbers. A man who believed sin was organized, too. He watched the line. He watched the children clutching birds bigger than their torsos. He watched the city fail in real time. He spoke carefully. He condemned the money. He could not deny the result. The gangster listened. No smile, no argument. Only the tired certainty of a man who knows what the neighborhood needs and knows what he can provide. By night, the tables were empty. The street cleared. Hands that were empty in the morning carried food home. Some carried cash home. Some carried both. The police never moved. No warrants, no raid, no public arrest, nothing. That was the point. This was a man committing a crime and collecting gratitude in the same motion. This was a man turning hunger into protection. This was a man turning charity into armor. To understand how this happened, we have to go back. Harlem, New York, the early 1960s, a neighborhood pressed up against Manhattan's wealth, but sealed off from it by custom, by hiring offices that did not call back, by landlords who raised rents without repairs, by banks that did not lend, by stores that charged more and offered less. There were rules everyone understood, not written, not signed, still enforced. A black man could work all day and still be short at night. A steady job could vanish without warning. A paycheck could stop, and nothing replaced it fast enough. Bills did not pause. Rent did not pause. A sick child did not pause. In that world, hunger was not dramatic. It was routine. It was quiet. It was a pot that stayed half full. It was children learning the taste of beans and rice because the fridge had nothing else. It was old people counting coins and deciding what to skip. Medicine, heat, food. One of them had to lose. The city had welfare. The city had offices. The city had clerks behind glass. But the help came with conditions, questions, forms, waiting rooms, and a number that could disqualify you. $42 a month. That could be enough to make you too rich on paper. $10 a week after rent. That could still count as income. It was legal poverty, approved poverty, the kind that let the system close the file and move on. Harlem learned to distrust official help, not because people refused it, because it refused them. There was also policing, patrol cars, precinct houses, men who knew every corner boy by name, and men who were never seen on certain blocks. Unless something went wrong, arrests happened, cases happened, but convictions did not always follow. Witnesses did not appear. Witnesses changed their minds. Paperwork found problems. Evidence thinned out, sometimes by fear, sometimes by favors, sometimes by exhaustion. A neighborhood can be over-policed and under-protected at the same time. Harlem was. The law could show up fast for a small crime. The law could take its time for a larger one. People noticed. They adjusted. They kept their mouths shut. Silence became another unwritten law. Not loyalty. Survival. There were churches. Baptist churches with open doors. Pastors who preached order. Pastors who warned against gambling. Pastors who asked men to bring their paychecks home. They ran food pantries. They passed around envelopes. But churches worked on donations. Churches worked on faith. Faith did not buy truckloads. Faith did not keep a line moving for hours. The needs were too big. The gap was too wide. And the legitimate economy did not fill it. White-owned businesses outside Harlem took labor. They did not always offer respect. A black steel worker could be laid off and forgotten. Unemployment could run out. A wife could scrub floors for $8 a week, and the rent would still be late. 3 months late. Eviction notices did not care about effort. They cared about cash. That pressure created its own economy. Cash businesses, cash jobs, cash favors. And in Harlem, the most dependable cash was illegal. Policy gambling, small bets. Daily hope sold in slips of paper. The math was simple. A poor person buys a chance. A runner collects the money. A banker keeps the book. Most people lose. A few win. And the house always has cash. That cash moved faster than any government check. It did not ask about your eligibility. It did not ask where you were born. It did not ask who your husband was. It did not ask you to wait in a chair while a clerk looked down at you. It came with its own price. Families felt it. Men chased numbers instead of groceries. Women hid rent money. Arguments started in kitchens, where the table was bare. Ministers were not wrong. Gambling could hollow out a household, but the money still circulated through the neighborhood. And when official systems failed, people turned to whatever system worked, not because they approved of it, because it was there. That is how power grows in a place like Harlem, not from speeches, from reliability, from a man who can make things happen when the city cannot. A landlord listens when a rent problem is handled in cash. A butcher listens when full price is paid without delay. A utility company listens when the past due bill is suddenly covered. A precinct captain listens when a crowd is watching, and a reporter listens when the street is talking. There was another layer: respect, dignity. Harlem did not like being treated as a problem to manage. People wanted to be addressed as neighbors, not as cases, not as numbers, not as burdens. Any man who could provide help without humiliation gained something that could not be bought in Midtown. Protection, not armed protection. Social protection, a kind of shield made from memory. made from gratitude, made from 1,000 small moments. When someone got through a bad week because a door opened. In that environment, public morality worked differently. People could condemn vice and still accept help. People could hate the damage and still need the relief. People could pray on Sunday and place a bet on Monday. It was not hypocrisy. It was arithmetic. When the legitimate world shuts its doors, the illegitimate world becomes the hallway. And the man who controls that hallway controls the neighborhood's breathing room. This was Harlem before the spectacle, before the cameras, before the open street theater of charity and immunity, a place where poverty was constant, a place where dignity was scarce, a place where silence protected the living. And this was the world Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson lived in. He did not invent hunger. He remembered it. He said, he was born poor in South Carolina. He said, there were Thanksgivings with nothing on the table, no turkey, no pie, no extra days of food stacked in a corner, just empty. And the knowledge that nobody outside the family cared. That memory stayed, not as sentiment, as a calculation. Because a man who climbs out of that kind of lack learns two things: what desperation looks like and what loyalty costs. In Harlem, he made his money the way Harlem's underworld made money. Policy numbers, small bets collected from working people who needed a miracle more than they needed a lecture. He took that money. He built an empire with it. 8 million, by the city's own understanding, a gambling machine that ran every day, quietly, methodically, with runners and collectors, with men who protected the system and men who enforced it. He had been arrested again and again, 47 times by later counts. He did not stop. He adapted. He learned where the law was strong. He learned where it was weak. He learned what broke cases. He learned what bought time. And he learned what bought silence. Then he did something that looked soft, but wasn't. He started giving away turkeys. Not one, not a gesture, a plan. He began it in 1940. 200 turkeys, bought with the first serious policy profits. Back then, he was still building his name, still proving he could hold ground, still proving he could outlast men who wanted him gone. A turkey was not forgiveness. A turkey was a message. It said this money came out of Harlem, and some of it was coming back. It said he could provide what the city would not. It said he could stand in the open and not be touched. It said the neighborhood could benefit from his reign, even if it paid for it. The giveaway grew the way his business grew. Slow, deliberate. Every year it got larger. Not because the need got smaller, because the leverage got bigger. By the time it reached its mature form, it was no longer a handout. It was logistics. It was trucks. It was tents. It was ministers used as a screening system. It was suppliers in the Bronx selling wholesale, $20 a turkey. It was local bakeries making pies, so Harlem money stayed inside Harlem. It was canned goods and produce stacked like inventory. It was planning that began each October, a month of preparation for a single day of public proof. A man named Raymond Junie Bird handled the numbers. He kept the ledger close. He treated charity like a payout schedule. He coordinated. He counted. He tracked special cases. He knew what was left in the emergency fund before the day was over. He could tell you totals without blinking. He could tell you where every dollar went, not because he cared about virtue, Because the machine had to run clean, and a clean machine is harder to attack. On the street, people did not talk about budgets. They talked about the line. They talked about who got extra food. They talked about who got an envelope. They talked about who got told to come back if things got worse. They talked about the way he looked at people. He could read their situation without making them beg. He made dignity part of the package. That was not accidental. A man can take money from a neighborhood and still be hated. A man can take money and then give a little back and still be resented. But if he gives it back in a way that protects pride, the transaction changes. It starts to feel like repayment, not charity. And repayment carries obligation. The city could not compete with that. The city could offer programs. The city could offer forms. The city could offer delays. He offered direct relief. Fast, clean, visible. And visibility was the point. He did not do this in private. He did not do it through intermediaries. He did not hide behind church staff. He stood on the busiest street in Harlem and worked the line himself. He let cameras see him. He let police see him. He let reporters walk up and ask questions, and he made sure nothing happened. No arrests, no raids, no disruption. That lack of enforcement was also part of the gift. It told Harlem something the city never said out loud, that he could stand there and the law would swallow its pride, that his charity was not just food. It was protection, a shield built from public consequence. Police understood the consequence. Arresting him, there would not look like justice. It would look like cruelty. It would look like the city punishing the poor for receiving help. It would look like the law breaking up dinner on a holiday, and the neighborhood would answer. Not with petitions, with fire. So the law stayed still, and staying still made him stronger. A man can't buy that kind of immunity with cash alone. He buys it with timing, with optics, with the careful use of other people's need. He turned a holiday into a tactical position. A day when everyone's attention was focused. A day when the need was concentrated. A day when the neighborhood would remember. He did it for more than 2 decades. 23 years by that Thanksgiving morning. That is not a tradition. That is governance. A parallel city, a structure that outlived elections and policy shifts, a structure that did not depend on public approval from officials, only on results. And the results were simple. Food in hands, heat kept on, rent paid, medicine bought, a family not thrown into the street. Those are not abstract benefits. They are survival, and survival creates allegiance. There is a second layer to it, control. Every envelope handed out created a private record, a name, an address, a situation, a dependency. When he told someone to come to him personally, he was not just being generous. He was making a direct channel, bypassing his own people, creating access that could not be intercepted. That is how a boss keeps authority. He gives something the middleman cannot. Direct attention, direct protection, direct consequence if you betray him. People who received money did not owe him in the language of contracts, but they owed him in the language Harlem understood. Memory, silence, support when police asked questions, a refusal to testify, a refusal to identify faces, a refusal to cooperate. Not because he was loved as a saint, because he was known as a provider. That is why the spectacle worked. That is why the police watched and did nothing. That is why ministers showed up and argued with themselves. They could condemn the money. They could not deny the food, and he knew it. He said it out loud, in his own way. He did not claim to be good. He did not claim to be redeemed. He claimed something else. That poverty was real, that it was children crying because their stomachs hurt, that it was old people choosing between medicine and food, that prayers did not fill a pot, that intention did not keep the lights on. He made money from gambling. He admitted it. Then he said what mattered. That as long as he could prevent it, nobody in Harlem would go hungry on Thanksgiving. That was the promise. That was the contract. Not signed, not written, but enforced every year, in the cold, on the curb, in public. And once a neighborhood sees that kind of power exercised openly, it changes what it believes is possible. It stops looking to the city for rescue. It starts looking to the man who proves he can deliver, even if the delivery comes from crime. Thanksgiving morning held its own kind of courtroom, not inside a building. On the sidewalk, the witnesses were already lined up. 6 blocks of them, and the judge was the public mood. A gangster understood that better than any politician, because politicians worked in private. He worked in consequence. He stepped out of the Cadillac and did not rush. He looked first. He measured what he had built. Not the tents, not the tables, the line. He saw faces that would remember him for the rest of their lives, not because he was kind, because he was useful at the exact moment the city was absent. The operation moved like a business. A turkey, a bag, a pie, a hand, a smile that did not ask permission, a quick word. Then the next person. There was no chaos, no argument over who deserved what. His men controlled the pace. His presence controlled the temperature. Even in the cold, even with children crying, even with hunger in the air, the line kept moving. He stayed visible the entire time. That visibility was the weapon. Because every minute he stood there, the police were forced to accept a public truth. They could not touch him today. Not without touching the poor first. Not without looking like they were taking dinner out of a widow's arms. Not without starting something they could not stop. NYPD Captain Michael O. Sullivan knew the rules. 15 years of chasing the same man teaches you where the walls are. He had arrested him before. 8 times, by his own memory. Every case slid away. Witnesses vanished. Evidence bent. Judges found defects. The paperwork failed. Sometimes the system failed itself. Sometimes the neighborhood made it fail. And now Sullivan stood across the street, watching the same man operate in broad daylight. Food purchased with illegal money, distributed under cameras, surrounded by men the precinct recognized. Men wanted for things nobody could prove in court. Sullivan's posture was stiff, not with fear, with restraint. The kind that feels like humiliation because the law was present and powerless. A reporter came up around midday. A simple question. Why weren't the police intervening? Why allow it? Why let a known criminal perform like this? Sullivan did not reach for a prepared answer. He gave the only one that fit. What do you want me to do? He did not have to shout. The street would have heard him anyway. Arrest him for giving away turkeys. Another pause, long enough to let the logic settle. He knew what an arrest would look like. He saw the mothers. He saw the children. He saw the old men leaning on canes. He saw the cameras. He saw tomorrow's headlines. He saw the mayor's office calling. He saw his badge on a desk. He saw his men surrounded. He saw Harlem ignite. Not because the neighborhood worshipped a gangster, because the neighborhood would not tolerate the city attacking the only help it could touch. Sullivan understood the deeper trick. Johnson had created a situation where enforcement became self-harm. Charity made him untouchable. Not in a moral way, in a tactical way. The reporter pushed further, asked if something was wrong with a system where criminals provided better social services than the government. Sullivan's face hardened. Not at the reporter. At the truth, the city spent enormous sums, departments, agencies, social workers, administrators, and still it could not do in a month what Johnson did in a day, feeding thousands. Efficient, generous, no humiliation, no forms, no glass window, just a handoff and a nod. Sullivan could not praise the man. But he could not ignore the comparison, so he turned the question away from the gangster and toward the city. If you want to write about what's wrong, he implied, write about that. Write about how Harlem had become a place where the illegal system was the only system that moved fast enough. Write about why a widow could be too rich for assistance and still be hungry. Write about why working men were disposable. Write about why families were one late rent payment away from the street. Johnson did not need to argue with the police. The street argued for him. Every turkey in a child's arms was testimony. Every envelope slipped into a coat pocket was proof of capability. Every camera flash was reinforcement. And the longer the day went, the more the spectacle sharpened. Word spread, not by newspapers, by mouths, by stoop conversations, by cousins calling cousins, by women sending children to tell neighbors. People heard this year was generous. They heard there was cash. They heard special cases were being handled. The line swelled again in the afternoon. Not with gamblers, with people who had not planned on standing in the cold, but who understood opportunity. Johnson did not turn them away. That was another message. This was not limited to his customers, not limited to his runners, not limited to those who fed his machine. This was wider. Harlem. That claim mattered because it made him less like a businessman and more like a ruler. At dusk, he ran out of turkeys. A normal charity would close. A normal program would post a sign. He did not close. He sent men to buy more. Full price, plus tips. He kept the line moving into darkness. That decision cost money. It bought something else. It said he would not be outdone by the calendar. It said he would not let the day end with a hungry person walking away. That kind of decision turns into legend fast. A man arrived late, arthritis, a cane. A life spent working. He did not demand. He asked softly. He expected nothing. Johnson handed him a turkey, purchased minutes earlier, then an envelope, $75. A warm coat was mentioned like a requirement. The man tried to refuse. Johnson shut it down without raising his voice. Don't argue with me. That line told everyone watching something important. This was not charity that required gratitude. This was charity that required obedience. The same voice that could order violence could also order relief. And either way, the neighborhood listened. By night, ministers came not to receive food, but to see what they could not stop. A pastor who preached against gambling watched the tables empty. He watched children hold birds almost as big as their bodies. He watched old women walk away with bags that would last a week. He watched the police stand still. He watched the city's moral language collapse. Under the weight of practical reality, he spoke to Johnson at the edge of the operation. Carefully, he could not endorse the money. He could not endorse policy. He said it destroyed families. He said he had counseled the damage. Then he looked at the line and admitted something else, that today looked like God's work, even if funded by the devil's business. Johnson listened. Then he answered like a man who wanted no illusions left on the street. He said he knew what he was, a criminal. He did not pretend otherwise. He said he remembered being hungry. He said poverty was not a concept. It was a child's stomach hurting. It was an old person choosing between pills and dinner. He did not promise redemption. He promised one thing, that on this holiday, he would pay what he owed. That was the phrase, pay what I owe, not penance, debt, a gangster's language. At the end of the day, the tables were empty, the street cleared, the cold stayed. A ledger came out. Totals were reported like a business closeout. 3,000 turkeys, all canned goods gone, all produce gone. 2,000 pies. Cash payments to hundreds of families, $22,000. A day's cost, $100,000. Numbers spoken clean, no flourish. Johnson answered with another number, 400,000. That was what he made in policy last month, by his claim. Then he did the math out loud. A quarter of 1 month's profit returned. He called it fair. He called it right. Then he issued the next order. 4,000 turkeys next year. 15,000 people fed. Planning starts in October. That was not hope. That was policy. He crushed his cigar under his shoe. He pulled his coat tighter. He got into the Cadillac. The car moved through Harlem slow, past people carrying what he had handed them, past children asking why a man like that gave so much, families who did not have to have the conversation they feared. Not today. Back upstairs later, bourbon in a glass, he looked out at the lights. Tomorrow he would be the man the precinct hated. Tomorrow he would collect bets. Tomorrow he would handle theft inside his own machine. Tomorrow he would deal with competitors who did not respect him. But today had done its job. 10,000 people ate because he decided they would. And in Harlem, that decision mattered more than sermons. It mattered more than editorials. It mattered more than arrest warrants that never came. Because the city could argue about law. The neighborhood argued about food. And food won. That is how he stayed standing. Not only through fear, through consequence, through a holiday turned into a shield, through the simple fact that, on the coldest morning of the year, for many families, the only man who showed up ready was the one the law could not touch. The day was built for agreement. A holiday, a church front, food on tables, cameras taking clean pictures, even the police holding their distance. It looked like a truce. Then a man in a collar stepped into the edge of it. Reverend Dr. William James, Mount Olivet Baptist Church. He did not come for a turkey. He did not come for an envelope. He came to watch, and to be seen watching. He stood where the line thinned, where the tables were half stripped, where the cold had settled into bones. Johnson noticed him. Without turning his head, he kept his hands moving. A bird to the next family, a bag of cans, a quick nod, a child guided forward, a bodyguard shifting one step to block a camera angle. The minister waited. He did not push through. He did not raise his voice. He let the scene prove itself first. Children holding food like it was property. Old women moving carefully, clutching paper bags against their coats. Men carrying turkeys with two hands as if dropping one would be a mistake they could not afford. The minister's eyes stayed on the process. Not the smile, not the gratitude, the mechanism, because he preached against this money. Every Sunday, he told his congregation what policy did to families. He told them how men chased numbers and came home empty. He told women to hide rent cash. He told fathers to stop feeding the book. He told them men like Johnson were not salvation. They were delay, a distraction, a trap dressed as hope. So now he stood on the sidewalk and watched the trap feed the neighborhood. Johnson's coat was still expensive, but it had changed. Flour dusted the sleeve, smudges from handling bags, a cigar shortened to a bitter stump. The fedora still set right, but the man inside it was doing work. 13 hours of it. He did not look tired. He looked controlled. The minister took one step closer. Not to the table, to the boundary line where the organization ended and the watching began. Johnson shifted his weight and finally turned. He did not smile. He did not frown. He held the minister in place with a look that asked one question. Why are you here? He spoke first. His voice stayed low. He did not offer warmth. He offered clarity. Reverend. Silence followed, long enough for the minister to understand. He had been invited to speak in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of hungry people who had already chosen the side that mattered today. The minister did not waste words. He did not perform. He said what he came to say. Brother Johnson. A setup, polite on the surface, a blade underneath. Then he gave the condemnation. On a clean line, policy gambling destroys families. He paused. He let the sentence hang. Where children could hear it, where reporters could hear it, where Johnson's men could hear it. Then he tightened it. I can't endorse where your money comes from. Another pause. He did not flinch. I can't stand here and say what you do is right. He looked past Johnson at the line still moving. At the last of the food leaving the tables, he acknowledged the reality without blessing the source. Today, you're feeding people. He let that sit. Then he turned it into the insult. Not loud, not dramatic, personal. In front of the neighborhood, even if the money comes from the devil's business. That was the challenge. He had called the operation what it was, and he had called Johnson what he was. A man doing God's work with the devil's cash. A contradiction in a camel hair coat. A public paradox. Johnson did not react. Not in the way a lesser man would. No bark. No threat. No lecture. He did something colder. He listened. He let the minister finish. He let the crowd absorb it. He let the cameras take it. Because the insult was not only in the words, it was in the location, in the timing, in the implication that this power had limits, that a preacher could stand beside it and still call it filthy, that Johnson could be useful and still be condemned. The minister added one more push. A wish disguised as advice. I hope one day you stop. A clean sentence, a public instruction, a man of God telling a man of Harlem how to live. Johnson held his cigar between two fingers. He did not raise it. He did not drop it. He did not crush it yet. He looked at Reverend James like he was looking at a bill that had to be paid. Not today. But eventually, he answered without heat. He answered like a man refusing to be controlled by the frame someone else just placed around him. I know what I am. He let that land. He did not defend himself. He did not beg for mercy. He did not ask for credit. He simply refused to take the minister's shame. And in that refusal, the disrespect sharpened, because the minister had come to name the sin, and the sinner had agreed. Without apology, that stole the preacher's power. It turned the confrontation into something else. Not repentance, negotiation. The line kept moving behind them, food still leaving the tables, a holiday still happening in real time. But the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer just charity. It was no longer just protection. It was a test, a public challenge to authority. Not from the police, from the pulpit. And Johnson stood in the cold and let it happen. What followed was not immediate. The minister's words stayed in the air, not because they were loud, because they were true enough to sting. Johnson took a slow drag. He let the smoke leave his mouth in the cold. He did not turn away from the man of God. He kept his voice low, so only the minister and the men closest would catch it. I was born poor. A pause. In South Carolina. Another pause. My family went hungry. He did not dress it up. He did not romanticize it. He said it like a fact that shaped everything after. There were Thanksgivings with nothing. Silence. He looked past the minister to the line. Still moving. Children with food. Old women with bags. Working men carrying weight they could not buy. That stays with you. He turned back to Reverend James. You preach. A small pause. You pray. Another. That's good. Then the correction. But poverty don't listen to prayers. He let that sit, not as an insult, as a statement of method. He kept talking. The words came clean, controlled. Poverty is children crying because their stomachs hurt. Line break. It's old people choosing between medicine and food. Line break. It's a man looking his kids in the face knowing he can't fix it. Line break. He did not say the minister was wrong. He said the minister's tools were limited, and he said it in front of the evidence. He lifted one hand, palm open, toward the tables. Look at them. He did not need to point. The minister was already looking. I make my money from gambling. A pause. Yeah. A pause. He did not hide behind euphemisms. He did not say business. He did not say investments. He said what it was. Then he said what he believed it obligated him to do. I make sure nobody in Harlem goes hungry on Thanksgiving. Another pause. If I can prevent it. He kept his eyes on the minister. He did not ask for approval. He gave a boundary. Maybe it don't balance nothing. A pause. Maybe I still burn for it. A pause. He let the minister hear that he understood the preacher's world. Then he rejected its leverage. But at least I tried to do one thing right. That was as close to confession as he allowed, not repentance. Accounting. The minister stood still. He had come to name the evil. He had named it. Now he was forced to speak about the result. The result stood in front of him in turkey grease and brown paper bags. He chose his words with care, not because he feared Johnson, because he feared blessing the wrong thing. I can't endorse where it comes from. He repeated it for the crowd, for himself. Then he spoke the part that cost him. But I can't deny what's happening. Silence. He watched another family move away. A mother holding a child, a man taking the weight from her arms. He looked back at Johnson. "And you're doing it with dignity." That word mattered because dignity was what the city refused to offer. Dignity was what charity often stole. Dignity was what a preacher tried to restore with sermons. Johnson restored it with a handoff and a nod. The minister added one more line, a last attempt to keep authority. "I hope one day you stop running policy." A pause. "And use your talents for something clean." Johnson did not smile. He nodded once. A slow acknowledgement, not agreement. Then he ended it. Not with menace, with certainty. "Reverend." Pause. "I know what I am." Pause. "I don't pretend." Pause. "But these are my people." The words were simple. They hit like a claim of ownership, because that was what it was. Harlem was not just where he operated. It was what protected him. The minister heard it. The men around them heard it. The cameras caught the posture. If they missed the words, then Johnson turned back to the line. He did not linger. He did not keep debating. He did not let the minister turn the sidewalk into a pulpit. He returned to the work like the work was the point. And it was, because every minute spent talking was a minute a family stood in the cold. He handed out more food. He shook more hands. He made small decisions that carried large consequences. Extra cans, another pie, a quiet envelope for a woman who looked too thin, a larger envelope for a man whose eyes carried eviction. He did it without ceremony. A boss approving expenses. Behind him, Raymond Junie, Bird stayed near. Ledger open, eyes scanning. Counting what remained, tracking who received what, recording names when Johnson ordered it, recording addresses when Johnson wanted follow-up. Charity, on paper, becomes another kind of intelligence. A map of need, a list of debts that aren't spoken. The day moved at its end. The light collapsed early. Cold tightened. People came later than they should have. People who heard rumors of cash. People who had been too proud at dawn. Too desperate by dusk. Johnson did not turn them away. When turkeys ran low again, his men went out again. The street kept moving, and the police kept still. They watched the final hours like men swallowing a defeat, because Johnson had built a trap that did not require a gun. He had built a public scene where enforcement looked evil. He had built a day where the law had to choose between optics and authority, and the law chose optics. That choice told Harlem something. It told Harlem who could be pushed and who could not. When the last family reached the table, the moment did not feel dramatic. No applause, no speeches, just hands, paper bags, a turkey placed carefully, a short goodbye. Then the street started emptying. Tables went bare. The tents looked smaller without the crowd. Bird came in close with the final accounting. Numbers spoken like a closing statement. 3,000 turkeys, all goods gone, cash paid out, $100,000 spent. Johnson listened. Then he said what mattered to him. Not the totals, not the praise, not the photographs. The next year, he wanted it bigger. 4,000 turkeys, 15,000 people. A plan stated like an order. Bird agreed. Planning in October, the machine would repeat itself. Johnson crushed his cigar. He pulled his coat tight. He got into the Cadillac. The car rolled away slow through streets, carrying the proof of what he had done. And behind that car, Harlem carried something else. Not just food, a memory, a debt, a story that would outlive the holiday, because the city had watched and done nothing, and Harlem had watched and understood exactly why. The Cadillac moved through Harlem like it owned the right of way, slow, not cautious, deliberate. People on the sidewalk saw it and did not step into its path. They stepped aside with food in their hands, with paper bags pressed to their coats, with turkeys carried like trophies and necessities at the same time. This was the part no camera framed right. The aftermath, the walk home, the stairwells, the tenement kitchens where heat was weak and space was smaller than pride. A turkey on a table changes a room. It changes the sound. Children stop asking what's for dinner. Mothers stop doing math out loud. Men stop staring at their hands like they failed. For one night, hunger loses, and the man who caused that loss becomes a name spoken carefully, not like a saint, a fact. A woman who received an envelope would not announce it. She would hide it. She would pay what needed paying. She would keep the lights on. She would keep the landlord quiet. She would buy medicine. And when a cop asked questions later, her mouth would stay shut. Not because she loved crime, because she remembered the cold, because she remembered the line, because she remembered who stood there for 14 hours while the city stood across the street doing nothing. A man like Robert Jackson would carry the cash like it could vanish. $200. A whole month pushed back from the edge. He would pay rent first. He would buy food that wasn't beans and rice. He would look at his children eating and feel something close to relief. Then he would feel the second thing. Obligation. Not written, not demanded, just there. Because Johnson had said it plain. You don't owe me nothing. That line was a lie Harlem understood. You always owe. Maybe not money, maybe not service, but silence is a form of payment, and memory is a form of protection. Johnson's people would follow up. Not as social workers, as scouts. A man checking in 2 weeks is not only kindness, it is information. It tells the organization where weakness sits. It tells them who is desperate. It tells them who is grateful. It tells them who might be recruited. A job offer can sound like salvation when a man has been laid off too long. A small task, a delivery, a favor, a way into the machine, and once you are inside, you do not speak. Gloria Mendes would carry her infant and the food, and the envelope through streets that did not care about her situation. Her husband was on an island jail. Her income was washing. She did not want charity. She wanted survival. Johnson gave her both, and he gave her something else. Access. Come straight to me. That sounded protective. It also sounded like ownership, a channel that bypassed his own men, a direct line that made her part of his awareness. People in Harlem understood the danger and the safety of that kind of attention. They still accepted it. Because the baby needed formula. Reverend James would go back to his pulpit after this. He would preach against gambling again. He would warn women again. He would tell men again that numbers were a trap, and his congregation would listen. Then some of them would still place bets, because sermons do not pay rent, because hunger does not respect morality. The minister would also carry a private humiliation. He had watched a criminal do what his church could not do at that scale. Feed that many, help that fast, without making people feel small. He could condemn the source. He could not erase the impact. And in Harlem, impact has its own theology. Captain O'Sullivan would return to his precinct with the same problem he had the day before. Bumpy Johnson. Only now the problem was heavier, because the whole neighborhood had fresh proof. Proof that the police could be forced to stand still. Proof that the city could be shamed into inaction. Proof that Johnson could operate openly, and the law would choose quiet over conflict. Sullivan might hate the man, but he would also respect the tactic. Because it was clean, because it worked, because it made the police look cruel if they moved. Johnson had not fed Harlem by accident. He had fed Harlem as strategy. A man does not spend $100,000 in public without expecting a return. The return was not applause. It was insulation. He had built a human shield out of gratitude and necessity. 10,000 people fed is 10,000 memories, 10,000 reasons for someone to say, later, when asked, "I didn't see nothing." The city understood the risk of backlash. The neighborhood understood the leverage it now held. Johnson understood both. That is why he talked about next year. Before the street even warmed up, 4,000 turkeys, 15,000 people. He was not promising kindness. He was expanding infrastructure. He was deepening dependence. He was reinforcing the idea that the legitimate world would never be first to arrive. He would, as long as he was alive, as long as he was making money. That promise has a second edge. It is a vow. It is also a warning. If he can provide this, he can withdraw it. If he can keep the peace by feeding people, he can disturb the peace by stopping. He held that kind of power, not because he was elected, because he was believed. Later that night, bourbon in his glass, he looked out at Harlem's lights. He allowed himself something that resembled contentment, not celebration, not joy, satisfaction, the kind a man feels when a plan executes clean. Tomorrow, he would return to the other business. Collecting, paying winners, punishing theft, handling competition, dealing with men who tested boundaries, handling violence as a tool. Ministers would denounce him again. Police would chase him again. Reporters would write the paradox again. But the families who ate because of him would hold their own conclusion. They would not care about moral arguments when their children were full. They would care about who showed up. They would care about who treated them like neighbors. They would care about who made the holiday real. And that is how a criminal becomes untouchable without firing a shot. He becomes part of a community's survival story. He becomes the man people remember. When the legitimate world failed, he becomes protected by the very people he exploited, not because they were blind, because they were hungry, and because he understood that hunger is a voting bloc, a silent one, but loyal. The next year would come. October would come. Plans would be drawn. Wholesale calls made, trucks arranged, tents set, ledgers opened. The machine would repeat, and every repetition would do the same thing. Feed Harlem, and tighten the seal around the man who ran it. After that Thanksgiving, Harlem didn't change overnight. There were no banners, no speeches, no official acknowledgments, but behavior changed. People lined up earlier. Store owners stopped asking questions. Police cars drove slower down certain blocks, not because crime had ended, but because something else had taken its place. What Bumpy Johnson demonstrated was not generosity, it was substitution. When an official system fails to meet basic needs, another system will rise to replace it. Not loudly, not democratically, but efficiently. Food moved faster than paperwork. Cash moved faster than promises. Protection arrived without forms to fill out. For the people standing in those lines, the distinction didn't matter. What mattered was reliability. That is how informal power becomes trusted, not through fear alone, but through consistency. This is not unique to Harlem, and it is not unique to crime. Whenever institutions create gaps, someone will step into them, sometimes with compassion, sometimes with control, often with both. The danger isn't that such power exists. The danger is how easily it becomes normal, because once people adjust their behavior, once they stop expecting help from official systems, the replacement no longer looks temporary. It looks permanent. That was the real legacy of that Thanksgiving. Not the meals, not the headlines, but the quiet lesson the neighborhood absorbed. Authority belongs to whoever solves problems when no one else does. And once that lesson is learned, it is rarely forgotten.